this morning. I trust everybody stalled out today. This morning we're going to talk a little bit about our testimony. And we're going to think about it as a kind of a history lesson. And it's been said that those who do not learn from history are destined to repeat it. This was always this was actually something that my mom told me when I was a kid, because I didn't like history. History was not my favorite subject, and I told her, I made the comment, why do I need to learn about the past? The past, stupid. And she said, those who do not learn from history are destined to repeat it. And if you think about the things that we have gone through in history, the wars and the tragedies, most of which are things that we would not want to go through again. And if we do not learn from what we have been through, well, the chances are we will probably go through them again. Now, how does that tie into our testimony? You see, each and one of us, we have our own personal history. And as we teach that history lesson to the next generation, oftentimes those history lessons take the form of a testimony. Testimony, if you look that up in the dictionary, is defined as this: an open acknowledgement or a public profession of a religious experience. So, if you can imagine, it's actually using the words, telling someone about an experience that you had. Now, if you'll turn over in Revelation chapter 12, we're going to read a little bit about a testimony and the importance of our testimony. And each and every one of us, this morning, I'm going to put a challenge that you come up with or think about a testimony that you can share with someone else. And as I have oftentimes had the opportunity to share my testimony with people, sometimes that testimony takes much different forms. Oftentimes you have someone and they're in a situation and there has been something in your past that pertains to the situation that this other person is going through, and those words become an encouragement to someone else. Revelation chapter 12, we're going to read verses 10 and 11. And it says, "And I heard with a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of His Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before God day and night. And this is talking about the end times here. And they overcame, which is us, and they overcame Him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they loved not their lives unto death." Vitally important. Your testimony could be the very thing which helps someone else overcome. Vitally important. And so I want you to realize that as important as this is, we actually need to have something to say. We need to have a testimony, a word of encouragement. And so, as we begin to think about, what is my testimony? What is this message that I would like to share with other people? And we think about the word testimony, the part of that word which oftentimes comes to my mind is the test. The old dreaded test. 1 chapter 4, verse 2 says, Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trials which is to try you, as though it's some strange thing that happened to you. You see, we are all tested. Each and every one are going to go through a trial or a test. And through this trial or test, we have the opportunity to build a testimony. Now, we do a lot of tests. We have a lot of tests at our house because I have kids in school. And so this testing thing is something that I've been an observer. You see, when the test comes and we get an A on the test, we hear about it. You know, we get to come in there and, hey, I got an A on the test. Exciting. We did get on the test. But see, when the test comes and we get an F on the test, no one says a word. We don't hear about the F on the test. And usually it's not until we get the report card or they've got this new thing where Kim can get on the internet now and see the kids' grades, you know. All of a sudden she'll say, Ben! Why did you get an F on these tests? We don't hear about the F's. The F's are not as much fun. The F's are not as, we don't talk about it. We don't bring on the paper. We don't put it on the fridge. Now, the A's and the F's of the tests. Think a little bit about the life of David. David views Goliath. He goes out into the battlefield. He defeats Goliath. He chops the head off. Everyone celebrates. David gets an A. Fun times. Fun times. And as you can imagine, that story is passed down through history. Fun things to talk about. What about the story of David and Bathsheba? Well, David didn't fare so well in that story. In fact, if I had to grade that, David probably would have got an F. Probably not as much fun to talk about. As you can imagine, David, as he got older in life and had the kids there, and had the grandkids gathered around, you can imagine which story he probably would have liked to have told. The story about Goliath, the day the giant came to town. Probably not as excited to talk about the story of Bathsheba and how he was weak and how he failed the test. But yet, both stories are equally important. You see, if the story of David and Bathsheba were not important, we wouldn't have it in our Bible today. The A's are important and the F's are equally important. In fact, I will even say that oftentimes the F's are more important. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on. Building your testimony. The A's and the F's. We've been we're doing this driver's thing at our house right now. So we're teaching Ben how to drive. And it's an important thing. You know, when you're driving a car, as I'm driving a car, well, I shouldn't say that. As I'm sitting in the back seat of the car that my child is driving, and I cannot reach the wheel or the brake or the gas, I'm thinking to myself, it is important that we teach this child to drive correctly. So we could all die in here at any time. So, you know, we've had these ice storms. And so we're teaching Ben about how to drive on the ice. There's a lot to learn about driving on the ice. The way the vehicle acts, and there's just certain roads that you don't want to go down. And so, as we are teaching him, we're telling him things about what not to do. For example, going in a four-wheel drive is not a problem. Stopping sometimes is the bigger issue. Especially when you get to the end of the road that's covered in ice and you're approaching the highway and there's a semi-truck coming and you can't stop. That becomes a serious issue in a hurry. Alright? And I can tell you from experience what to try to do and what to not do. Alright? Like these old vehicles, the old-timer vehicles that I drove when I was a kid, you had to, you could put it in neutral, take it out of drive, pump the brakes. We did all these weird stuff when we didn't have, these electronic braking things now, but they do. Always had these tricks, Teaching the next generation by our mistakes is just something that is second nature to us when it comes to driving. You know what? You don't want to go down this road because this road drifts shut. And you don't want to go down the Saddle Club because that hill just turns into a giant ski slope and there's no way you're going to get to the stop by the time you hit the bottom of it. Teaching things about the chainsaw. That's another good one. Chainsaw is kind of, run the chainsaw is a rite of passage at my house. So you've got to, when you get to a certain age, you got to learn how to run the chainsaw. Well, there's a whole lot of stuff that I've learned that you don't do with the chainsaw. And sometimes you learn that lesson the hard way. Some of those little things like, what happens if you put the chain on backwards, little things like that. It doesn't work real well. As we teach, we share the things that work, and we share the things that don't work. Now, when it comes time to our testimony, for some reason, we oftentimes share our success, but we don't share our failures. And I'm going to tell you why I think that is. You can imagine yourself sitting around David as he shares his success, as he shares the story of David and Goliath, how he defeated the giant. And imagine his difficulty in sharing his failures. There's one thing that gets in the way of sharing our failures, and that is our pride. We don't like to talk about the F's. We don't like to talk about the failures. But in order for the next generation to overcome, we have to be truthful. We have to tell them the story of our failures. It is, after all, our testimony. This morning, if we could have a song of invitation, I want you to think about those successes and those failures. Those stories that are fun to talk about, and I want to think about the stories that are not as much fun. The tough stories. The stories about the time you failed. Because if we do not teach this next generation the story of our own failure, they are destined to make the same mistakes. And I don't know about you, but I would just as soon spare my children the mistakes that I have made. If there is any way that I can have somebody avoid some of the lessons that I've learned the hard way and avoid the consequences of those lessons, I would love to do that. And sometimes all it takes is just putting our pride aside, humbling ourselves, and telling the truth, as we sing this morning.